Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shawn Brown, Program Officer with the Kansas Health Foundation. Welcome to the Healthy Communities Initiative webinar, Food and Farm Councils, Mobilizing Communities to Support Healthy Local Foods. Just a couple of housekeeping items as we get started. All of your phone lines are muted to reduce background noise, so please use your audio pin so that your lines can be unmuted to participate in discussion. Please also make sure that your computer speakers are turned off or muted to help eliminate background noise. The webinar is being recorded and will be archived on SharePoint, and time will be set aside for questions at the end of the webinar. So please type any questions you have in the chat box on the right side of your screen. We'll also close with announcements about upcoming events and due dates. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our speakers. Misty Lechner is the Advocacy Project Director, Midwest Affiliate for the American Heart Association. Misty has experience planning and implementing and evaluating worksite wellness programs for many companies throughout the state. She has worked with numerous health and wellness coalitions at the worksite, community, and state level. She was the worksite wellness specialist for KDHE for 5 years before starting in her current position at the American Heart Association, where she is the Advocacy Project Director, managing the Kansas Alliance for Wellness, a statewide partnership to improve access to healthier foods and beverages. Natasha Frost is a staff attorney at the Public Health Law Center at William Mitchell College of Law in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Natasha provides legal technical assistance on public health issues for communities and local governments across the country. And her expertise includes consultation and technical support around systemic efforts. And she has spent a lot of time in Kansas to assist communities engaged in healthy food initiatives. So we pretty much consider her an honorary Kansan. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Misty and then Natasha.
Thank you. As Shawn said, I am Misty Lechner, and I am the Advocacy Project Director for the American Heart Association. I get to manage the Kansas Alliance for Wellness, which I lovingly refer to as CAW. And for those of you who don't know, it is a statewide network of communities, organizations, and individuals that are all committed to improving the health of Kansans by creating healthier food and beverage environments. As sort of a background to put the Food Policy Council work in perspective, CAW is a sort of coalition of coalitions. So the target audience for CAW are the organizations and leaders who can mobilize the community for policy and environmental level changes in their cities or their counties. Really, the two main objectives for the Kansas Alliance for Wellness are to enhance existing community health coalitions or develop new health coalitions where they don't exist, and also to leverage those efforts and the successes that are seen at the local level as a catalyst for some state level changes through grassroots advocacy. So through the Kansas Alliance for Wellness, the first policy priority has been food policy councils. And this is really in order to build the capacity to better advocate for nutrition and food policies at a state level. So food and farm councils, what are they? They are really local, healthy food and farm partnerships. They are a platform for people to have an amplified voice in local and state political processes, particularly as it relates to food. They can act as an advisory council to local elected officials. They can also bring about some better coordination of efforts, even among organizational leaders. So some of the impacts that they will have will not only be public policy, but also some private sector impacts as well. These councils are diverse. They bring together stakeholders representing all parts of the food system. So that does mean the people who grow the food, the stores or the markets that sell the food, the organizations that buy and serve food like hospitals and schools, the consumers who eat the food, and really everyone in between, and all types of organizations that have an impact on local food systems. You will notice I am calling them food and farm councils. Traditionally in the past, particularly many public health advocates have known them as food policy councils. In Kansas, they are also known by many different names. Some are known as food policy councils. Others are known as food councils, food and farm councils, food, farm, and community alliance, and then others are known as growing rural opportunities works, or GROW councils. What we've noticed is that food and farm councils has been the term that's most widely accepted because it does seem to encompass a larger scope of work that these councils do. Not only do these councils advocate for policies that make healthy local food more available, but they also can help coordinate with the other community initiatives. So the information, the community education, and the environment all help to support the policies that they are working towards. So what do food and farm councils actually do? In many cases, they collect and report data to help shape the most effective food system. They drive changes to make more fresh, healthy food available in our communities. They craft strategies to increase the ability of local farms to sell their foods locally. And they work to support more effective food production. And what I mean by this is they really help to balance that supply and demand side. So what is being grown is actually what's being desired there at the local level. So what do I do? What do I do with food and farm councils? I actually help facilitate some community meetings. I provide community education. I use the tools that Public Health Law Center have developed to draft resolutions and bylaws and help turn those into action based upon the thoughts and the feedback that I have received at many of the community meetings that I have facilitated. So these are actual examples seen on the screen of what the food and farm councils in Kansas do. Every single council is different, but they all work towards making the changes that make the most sense for them and their community. Each council in Kansas either has completed or is planning to complete a food system assessment. And that's really to help them determine their starting point and so they can implement the most impactful supports. Others are working towards or helping with a food hub. So for those of you who don't know what a food hub, I'm going to really oversimplify this, but it's where individual farmers can kind of aggregate their products and sell them to larger markets. These can be schools, hospitals, and restaurants, where one farmer may not grow enough of their product to sell to a large school, but multiple farmers together can. So it opens up new markets for them. Other communities are actually working towards finding solutions for food deserts, or these are areas that don't have access to fresh, healthy food. This may be through grocery stores. It could also be through other food retail, so that could be a farmer's market, or sometimes it's just getting healthy food into an existing storefront, such as a small pharmacy or something like that. Others are working towards systems that can actually get healthy local foods into the hands and the mouths of low-income residents in their community that might not otherwise be able to afford the food like fruits and vegetables. This could be through SNAP double-up programs at farmers markets, plant-a-row programs, or donating extra garden produce to food pantries, or other efforts that actually reduces food waste in retail establishments by redirecting that food that would normally go to landfills into their food pantries. And then some other communities in Kansas are actually working towards getting more youth and young adults involved in farming, either through community gardens, school food programs and culinary programs, youth education, and even access to commercial kitchens to process foods. So there are really three main types of councils. And the types of councils there are, it really depends on your community as to which is the best for you. So the first type of council is a governmental or publicly appointed council. So what that means is that advocates have gotten together and have worked with their city or county commission in many cases to get a resolution establishing a food council, and in many cases also publicly appointing members to that council. So not only is there a resolution saying, yes, we now have a Food and Farm Council that is our official advisory committee on all things food policy, but we also have appointed members that are responsible for coming back and reporting progress to us as county commissioners or city council. Another different type of council is the non-governmental or nonprofit. So in some cases, this might be where the local elected officials are maybe not as supportive of this concept at first. So the local food advocates get together and say whether they're going to formally establish us as their advisory council or not. We're going to tell them what we want in our local food system anyway, as grassroots advocates and as their constituents. So they may not have the public blessing or the resolution establishing them, but they are still speaking up and advocating for what they want in their food system. And then there is this hybrid model between the two. And that is where, in many cases, a group of advocates get together, they develop their bylaws, they formally establish themselves as a food council, and after establishing themselves, or in the process of establishing themselves, they might have the local elected officials, like the county commissioners, say, okay, we're going to appoint you as an organization as our advisory council. So it takes a nonprofit organization and establishes them as their advisory council. So it's kind of the hybrid between the two. We actually have all of those different types of councils in Kansas, and here is a map of the different councils. You will see that there are 9 councils in Kansas, and those are the red counties. So we've got Douglas, Franklin, Allen, Crawford, Reno, Jefferson, Harvey, and Hodgeman counties all have formal food and farm councils. We also have the Greater Kansas City Food Policy Coalition, which is one of the non-governmental councils, in part because they actually cover many counties and many counties in 2 different states. You can also see on this map that there are a number of counties in Kansas that are green. So what that means is they are actively working towards the establishment of a food and farm council. Many of these are even building momentum and thinking even bigger beyond the county level. They recognize that some things are things that they can't do alone as one city or one county, and they have to address some issues on a regional or even a state level. Some of the regional issues that they may be interested in addressing are things like aggregation of food, processing and transportation of food. Then at the state level, it's things like sales tax on fruits and vegetables, and then most recently fighting House Bill 2595. You will see that some of these counties are clustered. You'll see some in northeast Kansas, southeast, central, and the northwest counties. And really, by developing these partnerships regionally, they're really increasing their capacity to advocate for many different changes at all levels of government, and even with private businesses as they come up with their community-driven changes. As you can imagine, with this wide, diverse number of counties in Kansas that are implementing these resolutions and developing these councils, there are also many different partners that have been engaged or that lead these efforts locally. Some counties, it's actually been the local health department. In others, it's been the community health coalitions. Sometimes it's been economic development. It's been K-State Research and Extension, RC&D, or Resource Conservation and Development. In some, it's the farmers and producers that are leading the charge. In others, it's even the Farm Bureau. In fact, what is so exciting is that the Farm Bureau at a state level has passed their 2016 resolutions. And what the resolutions are, they're essentially the organization's policy platforms. And although I don't have as much information on this process because I was not involved in the actual process to establish the resolutions, I do know that they did include food and farm councils in the policies that they support. And I have received actual copies of their resolutions, and the actual verbiage is that food policy committees should be voluntary and should include agriculture producer members from local rural communities. We encourage Farm Bureau members to participate in food policy committees, and we oppose food policy committees creating recommendations or standards that negatively alter our current food production system. So although this may not be perfect, it is fantastic because it does encourage Farm Bureau members to get engaged in these efforts. It has been so much progress, and I do think our Kansas Farm Bureau has been rather forward-thinking in getting engaged with these efforts locally. Additionally, they also passed a resolution that actually says that they support local food systems that encourage healthy eating habits and choices, and also availability and access of locally grown foods. So these are actual verbiage in their 2016 policy resolutions that can help you get the Farm Bureau engaged locally if they aren't already. And they are in many of these communities, and in some communities they're even taking leadership roles. So how do you actually form one of these food and farm councils? These are some of the steps that communities throughout Kansas have taken. And the first step that I think is crucial is finding your champion. This is a champion that is and should be able to do this as a part of their paid job duties. So it doesn't have to be their whole job to do a food and farm council, but really someone who can be the main contact person that has the ability to send emails, to plan meetings, to type up notes while on the clock. Volunteers are great, and they're fantastic, and I am not doubting their ability, but for the sustainability of this initiative, you do need to consider who that person could be that can at least do this as a part of their job. And then additionally, for sustainability, you shouldn't just have a champion, but you should have a team of people that can support the champion, that can provide their expertise and their talents. Although the champion may be the main contact person for all of the planning of this initiative, they shouldn't have to just be expected to know and do everything. For instance, on your team, you may have one person that has good contact with the local newspapers and knows how to draft up press releases or newsletter articles or do interviews. And that's a really valuable skill to have. Another person might actually talk to the county commissioners all the time, might even be a part of their job to be in constant communication with the elected officials. So that would be a good person to have on your team. Someone else, they might have access to free meeting spaces for the group or other supplies, meeting supplies that you might need. All of these things can be very helpful to helping the champion out so it's not quite a burden. And then I will also say, once you have your team, it is very important they all have access to the Public Health Law Center resources that have been developed that Natasha is going to talk about. It really helps them get on the same page and speak a common language. The next step is knowing the support of your elected officials. And I say that because you don't have to have the support of your elected officials, just know where they stand. So if you know your elected officials are not interested at all in health, but they might be interested in farming, that might be how you communicate this to them. Or if they're just not interested in this at all, maybe you have to go for that non-governmental council so you can still have an amplified voice without being publicly appointed. So it really helps you be the most impactful. And when you have those three things, call me. Call me because I can kind of help get you started down that road of getting a council established. So after you have that, I highly encourage you to schedule an informational meeting. So these informational meetings are typically larger audiences of people than just your champion and your core team. These are people and organizations that really might want to be involved in the planning of a food and farm council. So I say involved in the planning because if it's a governmental initiative, they may not end up having a position as a publicly appointed member of that council, but if they're involved in the planning, they can help craft that, so maybe they will. Maybe they have a better chance of having a position on the final approved council. Having this informational meeting is also a great time to continue to share those public health law center food council resources. Again, a common language and some common expectations are really helpful, and that's what these resources can do at this informational meeting. It's also very important to determine your geographic boundaries and your membership structure. So in Kansas, are at a city level, some are at a county level, and some are regional, and that's okay. It's whatever makes the most sense for you and for your community. And then the membership structure might be publicly appointed, non-governmental, and those kinds of things. It's very important to also draft up your shared mission and purpose statements early on. And some examples of these mission statements are on the screen, and these are actual statements from councils in Kansas. You'll see that they include statements like enhanced quality of life for all residents, increasing access to economic opportunity, access to nutritious local food, or improved access to regionally grown healthy food options, promoting educational resources for the benefit of the local population. Having that shared mission statement will help you describe what your council is working on and help guide the entire process as you move forward. Now, these are examples of actual purpose statements or roles that have been included in different resolutions and bylaws of food and farm councils in Kansas. I know there's a lot of words on the screen, but this is just an example of some of the things going on. They do include things like increased access to and distribution of affordable, nutritious, and safe food for all residents, enhanced economic development, promoting agritourism, strengthening the local food system, bringing stakeholders together, improving health and well-being, coordinating and collaborating with existing initiatives, and education and awareness on how to even use healthy, locally produced food, and not just at home, but also in businesses and institutions. So that actually, developing these purposes and these roles will help each person on your team see where they fit. Because it is important for each person to know their roles and responsibilities in this council. It doesn't have to be just things like typing up meeting minutes, but their role might actually even be speak on behalf of a certain sector or a certain population within your community. And so having those shared purposes can really help them see where they fit in the bigger picture. I will say also, contacting other stakeholders, don't put on blinders early on. There are many stakeholders that might want to be invited to these meetings. And sometimes, even if they can't attend, they might want to be on an email list, or at the very least kept informed on a regular basis. Because sometimes not including them early on in the planning process means you get a lot of pushback and a harder fight later on. One tip that has been very helpful in the communities that I have worked in is when you draft up a public resolution, also begin the process of drafting bylaws at the same time. There is a lot of shared content between these two documents. And the more time you can streamline your work, so when you talk about this, you don't have to rehash the same information over and over, the more efficiently you can get the work done. So for instance, it might come up that you want to address voting and non-voting members. And this doesn't necessarily have to be in the resolution, but you do know that your county commission might be really interested in knowing the process and the structure of voting and non-voting members. This is the kind of information that might not be appropriate for a public resolution or a proclamation, but establishing a council and your resolution quickly and easily is something that your county commissioner will want to know. They will want to know you've done your homework. It will show them that you've got your bases covered by at least having a draft of bylaws already completed when you bring them a resolution. There are probably going to be many questions that they have that can be answered in a bylaws document. And I will say it again, the Public Health Law Center tools will make this so much easier. You don't have to start from scratch. I actually have copied and pasted information directly from our tools into Word documents to start the process of drafting resolutions and bylaws. And finally, engage the media and talk to your elected officials. And don't just do this at the end. Do this throughout the entire process. If you want to engage more stakeholders, talk to the media. Tell them about your meetings. Tell them when they are and where they are. Have them printed in the paper, because you might not know who's going to show up, and there might be someone who is really passionate, interested, and educated on these topics that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of. And talk to your elected officials multiple times. If it's not obvious why, it's because they don't want to be blindsided. And they can provide feedback early on in the process to really address red flags early on rather than when it's on their agenda. So once you get on their agenda, I want you to bring your drafted resolution and bring your bylaws. Even have a list of recommended appointees already. Not every county commission or city council will want you to provide a list of recommended appointees, but if they do, you can have it available, you can have the contact information there, and you can already know, you can say, these are the people who have been involved from the beginning. They know about it, and they have already committed that if they got invited to be on this council, they would absolutely, without a doubt, happily serve as one of the appointees. And also, very important, bring your team and bring your talking points. Show the support. Show the support in numbers and have the talking points ready so you can really easily answer the questions and show support in a uniform way. And finally, know that you don't have to start a food and farm council initiative all by yourself. There are resources out there. You will see on there Public Health Law Center resources, and there's a link. The Kansas Health Foundation grants for food policy councils. Health coalitions or other partners. Many of you I know are on health coalitions, but consider the Farm Bureau, research and extension, economic development, and farmers and producers in your area. Obviously, Kansas Alliance for Wellness technical assistance. I also have started a Kansas Food Policy Council Google group and listserv, so you can be connected directly to the other people working on these initiatives in Kansas. And Barb LeClaire with LeClaire Consulting, who does help people get their food system assessments started. So I'm putting my contact information up here because if you come up with a question after this webinar is over, you can always call me. You can always email me. If you want to be added to the Google group listserv, it is a private group because I did want to kind of reduce industry influence, but send me an email. I will add you to that group right away. So write down my contact information, and if you need anything, let me know. And otherwise, I will now let Natasha talk about those Public Health Law Center resources that I plugged so many times throughout my presentation.
Thank you, Misty. All right. And for those of you who are just listening in, these webinars or these slides are actually on SharePoint as well, and you can email the Kansas Health Foundation or somebody at the Public Health Law Center or Misty directly to get the slides. All right, so as Misty said, the Public Health Law Center has a series of resources that are specifically geared to help support the work that Misty is doing and the hard work around the state to develop these farm and food councils. And we call them food policy councils, food councils. Again, many of you have seen a presentation that we've done at the Public Health Law Center, and I would just say, potato, potato. These names are all the same, and conceptually what you're doing is you're establishing a group that's really going to work on the food systems in Kansas. So as you can see, we've developed a specific website for Kansas resources related to food councils, and this is just a screenshot as well as the link that Misty previously provided. And what I'm going to do today is quickly walk through the resources and talk about what is contained in each of the resources and how you might be able to use them in your work. But I would strongly encourage, as Misty said, for you to contact Misty directly to assist you with this. She is an excellent facilitator and can help guide and navigate your efforts in Kansas, and has a lot of lessons learned based on her really the great work she's been doing across the state. So the Public Health Law Center has funding from the Kansas Health Foundation to support healthy, affordable food access in Kansas. We also do work in access to active transportation and biking and walking. But for purposes of today's discussion, we're going to focus on the work we've been doing related to the food systems. And so we've developed two kind of overarching resources that can help start guiding the discussions for those of you who are at the very beginning of the process, or for those that have established food policy or food councils already. So the resource on the left is our policy options for local governments in Kansas, increasing access to healthy food. This document walks through the various local policy and environmental and systems efforts that you can engage at the local level. Things like looking at zoning or comprehensive plans from the perspective of increasing access to healthy food. We walk through the different policy opportunities, deconstructing that word policy from the local level perspective and really looking at it as an economic driver at that local level. It's a way to really kind of demystify and take away the anxiety at the local level of what you're talking about when you're talking about working on policies within the food system. Another resource on the right that we developed with the help of the Douglas County Food Policy Council and others is just a one-pager on what we are talking about when people talk about the food system. What are the components of the food system that the Food Council can actually work on in Kansas. And so that's a one-pager that can be useful, again, at the very beginning of the conversation or as you're pulling partners into the effort. And it's a way to use those common terms, common vernacular, so that people can use the same terminology when working towards this effort of, again, deconstructing the food system and the policy environment surrounding the food system. And specifically, we created two resources that can help guide you through your meetings. And these are the two resources she was referring to throughout her presentation. We've drafted a specific resource related to drafting a resolution to create a food council. This document on your left actually contains language, specific sample language, as well as examples throughout the state of ways that local governments have created food councils through that resolution process. We give exact language that has been used as well as sample components. And you can actually walk through with your group line by line, editing to make it really fit your local context. The same is true for our food council bylaws. We identify the specific components of bylaws, things that you should be talking about in your bylaws, things like membership, voting, frequency of meetings. These concepts are all outlined in the bylaws resource, talking about not only sample language, but why they're important to have language related to these different components. And so it's a way so that you can do the hard adaptive work of figuring out what's going to work for your community, but having a starting place for that discussion. In addition, we've developed a series of resources once your food council gets off the ground and rolling to really figure out what makes the most sense to work on for your council. So things like have really risen to the top across Kansas are working on farmers markets, either establishing, strengthening, or figuring out ways to remove barriers for farmers markets at the local level. We've created a series of resources related to that topic that are specific to Kansas, looking at things all the way from the state laws impacting farmers markets in Kansas down to that organizational structure and farmers market rules at that local level. In addition, many food councils have determined that they would like to work on things like increasing access to healthy food on governmental property through working on contracts or vending and embedding nutrition standards into those settings. And so we've developed a series of resources related to drafting and incorporating nutrition standards into vending policies and our contracts. And so these are two of the resources that we've developed. And the Public Health Law Center is also available for technical assistance in this area. In addition, these are our latest resources. They are more policy briefs. On the left, we have Increasing Farm to Institution in Kansas. This is our latest and greatest resource. We're very excited, and we will be having a webinar for Kansas communities in the coming months to really go through that resource and talk about the various components of the policy brief. It gives some hands-on experiences and deconstructing the different laws so that you can work on getting food into your institutional purchasing practice, whether that be at a very small level, such as at a senior center, all the way up to a larger level at a college or university. And our legal basis for land banks in Kansas is a resource that we developed. It has sample language for developing a land bank. This is actually being used by one community to go line by line. We have sample language in there, line by line, to actually develop their own local land bank policy. It actually provides a framework within the state legal framework for land banks, and then going down providing information for local level policymakers on what sample language could be for that local resolution or ordinance. And for those of you who are not familiar, a land bank is an opportunity to create an entity, usually through governmental action, that can take dilapidated or derelict property and turn it into a positive community use spot. Things like community gardens or other efforts have been highlights of land banks in several local Kansas communities. So those are the various resources that we have available to either help create or guide the conversations for food councils across Kansas. And I will say we've developed, again, a series of resources specific to Kansas, really relying heavily on our partnerships over the last 3 years in Kansas through the foundation, generous support, and we have a specific Kansas resources page that is highlighted on this slide. And I would encourage anyone working on areas related to physical activity or healthy eating to really check out our resources on our Kansas resources page. And for those of you who are also working in the tobacco control arena, we have a wide variety of resources and also technical assistance related to those efforts. And with that, we're going to go ahead and open up the conversation to participants to ask questions of Misty and I in regards to how to really further the work or utilize resources available to support your important work at the local level in Kansas. And with that, I will turn it back to the Kansas Health Foundation.
Are there any questions that you have? If so, please type them into the chat box.
So this is Misty, and while waiting for questions, I know that some of you have been really interested in how House Bill 2595 could impact the work of food and farm councils in Kansas. So I can talk to it just a little bit and give you some general information. House Bill 2595 does seek to preempt local efforts to address food-based health disparities, and particularly in settings like restaurants, food retail, and vending machines. The way it's written, it is vague enough, and we don't know how it could end up looking after the rules and regs process, but it could impact any entity that receives local public funding. So if a local food policy council receives any public funding at all, it could preempt your ability to advocate for some nutrition guidelines in different settings or other policies that could include even things like zoning and permitting. Again, this is all things that are still up in the air because it all ends up what actually goes into the bill and what goes through rules and regs. I will say that the original hearing was postponed, and it has just been rescheduled. It was announced today. The hearing will be in the House Committee on Labor, Commerce, and Economic Development on February 17th at 1:30.
Thanks for that information, Misty.
This is Jeff Usher. I'm a program officer at the Kansas Health Foundation. It looks like someone has a question regarding specific requirements for locals to meet before Kansas Health Foundation can offer funding. Currently, we have an open RFP for up to $10,000 for food assessment or capacity building of a local publicly appointed food policy council. And then we also have up to $40,000 for implementation. So the one requirement that we do have on this particular grant is that it needs to be publicly appointed. So there has to be a publicly appointed resolution of some sort or documentation that indicates that it is a publicly appointed food policy council. I might add those dollars are just about gone. We extended it. We had available up to $300,000. We now have less than $50,000. So if you're interested in getting involved in that process, you better hurry up. We also have a question here. What is the best way to incorporate these efforts into existing coalitions? In many communities, the main people are already involved in efforts, so adding a separate group is challenging. Misty, do you have any response to that?
Yeah. Actually, in some communities, it can be kind of a subgroup or an arm of a coalition. So you are right. Many of the right partners are already at the table, and you don't necessarily have to develop an entirely new coalition to do this. It actually would really help you out if you already have the partners at the table. I will go ahead and say, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, don't put on your blinders to think you have everyone just yet. There might be someone, particularly farmers or producers, who don't necessarily see themselves involved in a health coalition, but might see themselves in a food and farm coalition that could still be reached out to. But yeah, it can be a part of or a subgroup or a committee of a local health coalition. So how it looks in your community is very different than how it looks in another community, but it's all on the table.
And I think it's important to also consider, oftentimes health coalitions or local coalitions are engaged in a variety of other activities, which is really good. But if we're going to focus on the food system, we need to make sure that we have representation from what Misty has already described earlier in her presentation from other folks in that food system. And so that it really can focus on the access to healthy foods and in your community. And in some cases, actually, we do have one rural food council that actually engages in more than just food. So.
This is Natasha, and I'll just say when we talk about these stakeholders that kind of are key as part of the discussion, that is not something you have to come up that list on your own, although you might have additional stakeholder groups, but we, as part of the Public Health Law Center resources, and a great exercise for if there's an existing coalition, is to go through the different stakeholder groups that are outlined in the creating a resolution, and in the bylaws document it talks about the stakeholder group, and there's a graphic there that specifically lists out the key stakeholder groups to ensure that are part of the discussion, even if they're not specifically represented on the council as members. And I will also say that this is happening, and it certainly has happened in Kansas, keeping in mind that there are people as part of your stakeholders group that actually represent several different bubbles because they wear a lot of different hats, and this is particularly true in the rural communities where there's folks that are representing a lot of different interests. And so keeping in mind that you don't necessarily have to have one person as a representative for each of the stakeholder groups. Sometimes one person can represent multiple stakeholder groups.
We do have another question here. How are active transportation and food and farm task forces working together?
I would say in some communities they are actively working together. They are considering different opportunities for getting to the places where food is served or where food is bought. So are your communities walkable so you can actually walk to the grocery store? Others, it's zoning. How can we make sure there's mixed-use zoning so you don't have to drive because the grocery store is 5 or 6 miles away? You can just walk down the street, and mixed-use zoning is another opportunity. And in some cases, I know this is and has to do with active transportation, is they're also considering public transportation. And I know that this may not be an issue in rural communities so much as it is for more urban communities, but are places where you can buy food easily accessible on public transportation and bus routes. So all of these things actually could and should be a part of a scope of work in a food and farm council. So considering if you can walk, you can bike, you can take public transit, and considering mixed-use zoning are all things that can be done.
And this is Natasha again, and I'm joined here with my colleague Mary Mara, who is also working heavily in Kansas through the Public Health Law Center, and I'll let her add.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, this is Mary, as Natasha mentioned, and I just wanted to add to what both Misty and Jeff mentioned, because I think that as part of a lot of the work that the Kansas Health Foundation is doing with communities in Kansas, you know, there are these health initiatives, as Jeff mentioned, that may have originally been organized around active transportation, but because health is just such a theme and a central mission for these groups, they're realizing that, you know, making a distinction between physical activity and healthy food access, you know, doesn't necessarily serve those broader health goals. And so there is, as Misty was saying, you know, just like there's some really great synergy between the efforts between bike, ped, and active transportation and food access. And so even if the health group may be focused originally on active transportation, there may be opportunities for a food council to partner with that group, or for them to, or for the active transportation group or council to evolve into a broader food focus, depending on what the community needs and priorities are. But, you know, in addition, you know, just looking at the map that Misty provided, where there are current food and farm councils or where communities are working towards them, I know that there are also some other communities that may have started working on active transportation but are exploring the food component of their work as well. So it's just, that's just as an example of how those those health efforts at the community level can really evolve.
And that brings up a really great opportunity. Is it's going back, and I don't know if we can get Misty's map back, but there is so much energy in Kansas in this effort to really develop a variety of structures and focuses at the local level to improve the food system through these farm and food task force. So it's really important to think, I don't have to recreate the wheel. We've got resources from the Public Health Law Center to use as a starting place. There are other communities that have gone through the creation of councils at the local level already. There are groups that have already combined active transportation and bike ped efforts with the food system conversation. And so it's a real opportunity in Kansas to learn from your peers and learn from your communities that might be in a different part of the state but are really grappling with some of the same issues. And one of the mechanisms to really figure out who can help kind of guide you through that process is reaching out to Misty. She has this great map that really helps identify the communities and can help make those connections with other communities that are working on this important effort.
Great. Other questions?
Okay, we got a question here. Can you talk about some successes with communities that have food deserts?
This is Misty, and I can say many of these food and farm councils are quite new, but they have started to address things like food deserts. So there are some things being done, particularly getting locally grown and healthy foods into a pharmacy in southwest Kansas. There are efforts to get grocery stores and food deserts in a number of counties that I haven't been just really all that involved with, but I know that there are efforts in Reno County and Allen County. And additionally, there are efforts to get farmers markets in underserved areas. So even in Shawnee County, not just getting a farmers market in one of the housing developments, but also getting the SNAP Double Up program there as well, and partnering with Douglas County and their Market Match program to get a SNAP Double Up program in a housing development in an area where they otherwise wouldn't be able to access fruits and vegetables. So those are some very general examples, and I would welcome input from some of the other presenters if you would like to elaborate on any of them.
Douglas County also has their Common Ground initiative, where they've been able to take government-owned property and turn it into community gardens that can serve those high-need areas. Other questions? It doesn't look like we have any questions on this end, Sean, if you want to close us out.
Sure. Well, just a couple of announcements. The webinar recording will be posted on within the next several days, and you'll be receiving via email a link to a short survey to obtain your feedback about the webinar. So we'll use that information in planning for upcoming events and webinars. The next semi-monthly reporting forms are due March 15th, and the next statewide convening is planned for March 29th and 30th in Wichita. So more details will be following soon. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.